You're listening to Rudolf Steiner Audio.com. This is a reading of the essays that Rudolf Steiner wrote for the introductions to Goethe's scientific writings. It's compiled in a book called Nature's Open Secret. This is Chapter 5, entitled Concluding Remarks on Goethe's Morphology. When, at the end of these thoughts on Goethe's theory of metamorphosis, I look back over the views I felt the need to express, I must admit that many outstanding representatives of various schools of scientific thought share a view contrary to my own. Their position on Goethe is completely clear to me, and their assessment of my attempt to represent our great thinker and poet is quite predictable. The opinions about Goethe's scientific endeavors are divided into two opposing camps. The adherents of modern monism, led by Professor Haeckel, view Goethe as the prophet of Darwinism, and one who thinks of the organic world as they do, that it is governed by the same laws that operate within inorganic nature. They would say that the only thing Goethe lacked was a theory of natural selection, which provided Darwin with a foundation for the monistic worldview, thus raising the theory of evolution to the level of scientific conviction. This perspective is confronted by another that views Goethe's idea of the type as no more than a general concept, or idea in the sense of Platonic philosophy. Accordingly, they claim Goethe's inherent pantheism led him to make various assertions reminiscent of the evolutionary theory, that he never felt any need to penetrate to its ultimate mechanical foundations. Consequently, it is impossible to attribute a theory of evolution in the modern sense to Goethe. Through my attempt to explain Goethe's views without assuming any positive standpoint, based purely on Goethe's own nature and his whole spirit, it has become clear that neither of these two positions, as significant as their contributions to an assessment of Goethe have been, has interpreted his views of nature altogether correctly. The first view is certainly correct when it maintains that Goethe, in attempting to explain organic nature, opposed the dualistic assumption that there are insurmountable barriers between the organic and inorganic worlds. But Goethe never claimed that organic nature can be understood because its forms and phenomena can be explained mechanistically, but rather because he realized that the higher context in which they exist is in fact accessible to our knowledge. In fact, he conceived of the universe in a monistic way, as an undivided unity, from which he in no way excluded the human being. For this very reason, however, he saw that within this unity we can distinguish levels that obey their own laws. Even in his youth, Goethe rejected the tendency to picture this unity as uniformity, and to think of the organic world, indeed anything that manifests at a higher level within nature, as governed by the laws that operate in the inorganic world. Later, this rejection also led him to assume the validity of judgment through intuitive perception as a means of comprehending organic nature, and to distinguish it from the discursive intellect that comprehends inorganic nature. Goethe conceived of the world as a circle of circles, each with its own explanatory principle. Modern monists recognize only one circle, one governed by inorganic laws. Footnote: materialistic monism is still the basis of mainstream science. Nobel laureate Ilya Prigogine, but I'm not sure how to pronounce this name, Prigogine, Ilya Prigogine, for example, explains the transition from the inorganic to the organic in terms of physico-chemical fluctuations that produce irreversible advances toward more complex systems. He does not recognize a higher principle working from the whole into the parts in the development or behavior of organisms. See From Being to Becoming, The New Science of Connectedness. Editor, end of footnote. The second view recognizes that in Goethe we are dealing with something other than modern monism. But because those who represent this view believe that science must explain organic nature in the same way as it does the inorganic, they recoil in horror from views such as Goethe's, and consider it completely useless to look more closely at his endeavors. Goethe's high principles can thus never be fully validated by either camp, and it is precisely these principles that constitute the outstanding element in his endeavors. When it becomes clear that some of the details of Goethe's research need to be corrected, these principles lose none of their significance for those who recognize their full profundity. It thus becomes incumbent upon anyone seeking to expound Goethe's views to draw attention to what is central to the Goethean view of nature, and not to become mired in a critical assessment of the details of his findings in some particular area of science. Having attempted to carry out this task, I face the possibility of being misunderstood by those whose misunderstanding I would most regret, the pure empiricists. I am referring to those who explore every aspect of the factually demonstrable interrelationships of organisms, the material that presents itself empirically, and who, today, hold open the question of the primary principles of the organic world. My presentations cannot possibly be directed against them because they do not relate to them. On the contrary, a part of my hopes are built on the empiricists precisely because all avenues remain open to them. They are the ones who will be able to set straight some of Goethe's assertions, for in the factual realm he occasionally erred. In this regard, even a genius cannot overcome the limitations of his time. In the realm of principles, however, Goethe arrived at basic views that have the same significance for organic science as Galileo's basic laws have for mechanics. To establish this fact was the task I set for myself. May those who remain unconvinced by my words at least recognize the honest intention with which I have endeavored, setting aside all consideration of persons and focusing entirely on the subject at hand, to solve the problem I have indicated, to explain Goethe's scientific writings out of the whole of his nature, and to express what is for me an inspiring conviction. The fact that a happy and successful beginning has been made at interpreting Goethe's poetry in this way is in itself a challenge to re-explore all his works using the same approach. This is bound to occur sooner or later, and I will not be the last to rejoice when my successor succeeds better than I have. May youthfully striving thinkers and researchers, especially those whose views not only attain breadth, but penetrate directly to central insights, give my reflections their attention, and follow in droves to present more perfectly what I have attempted to set forth. The end of Chapter 5.